welcome, and yeah, thanks for spending the morning with us. I'm pretty sure that last time I was on stage at an AppNexus event talking 6 months ago, 9 months ago, something like that, I said that we were pretty much at peak disruption. The market couldn't be more challenged. There couldn't be more things that are going on. That was before 2018 came around. And I don't know about everybody here, but you have to at least hope we've reached some kind of peak disruption. I'm going to use this quote again, but a colleague of mine, Jerome, said the other day that it feels like this year somebody's shaken the snow globe, and everything is just in a complete state of flux all the time. It's almost like we're waiting for it to settle. But I think we just have to get used to operating in that kind of environment. But before I welcome my guest, I wanted to talk about this idea of building a better marketplace. But just before we do it, what do I mean by marketplace? They've been around for centuries. The only real definition, I think, that you'll be able to find is it's where buyers and sellers will come together and trade. So certainly it referenced the display marketplace very well. You can have B2B, B2C, C2C, of course. Places like Uber, eBay are great examples of online marketplaces. But at the same time, there's dynamics that have to be respected for marketplaces to function correctly. Buyers and sellers have to have the right kind of tools. We're certainly going to talk about sell-side tools and the buy-side tools in later sessions. Governance and legislation is incredibly important in any well-functioning marketplace. We've seen how that can challenge other marketplaces when it's not governed correctly. Uber would be a wonderful example of that as a starting point. But also, for them to work correctly, they all must be underpinned by trust and transparency from the consumer, in the case of advertising, of course the buyers and the sellers, and the relationship that needs to be maintained through those things. If they don't work particularly well, and I think everybody would agree there are certain challenges in some of those areas, certainly in the UK marketplace. Anyone who's come from overseas can discuss their experiences in the break with us. You can have all sorts of issues that would go on. You can pick your favorite one from some of the 2018 buzzwords that everybody keeps reading about from the screen here. But rather than going into too much detail, because of course we have a content program to cover those things, I wanted to talk about one of the more important marketplace constituents, which is the buyer. And in the case of the UK, certainly, one thing we're seeing now is the marketer leaning in much, much more. It was quite hard for us to try to round up 450 UK marketers. So what we've done is try to do the next best thing and bring Steve Chester from ISBA to talk to us. So please welcome to the stage, Steve Chester. The spec was to try to find somebody taller than me as well. So thanks for joining us, Steve. Just for the benefit of anybody who may not be familiar, could you just give us a quick 2 minutes? Who are ISBA and what's your role there?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Steve Chester. I'm the Director of Media at ISBA. Very simply, ISBA is a trade association for advertisers. It's been around for over 100 years, and it just has advertisers in its member base. So about 3,000 brands, a couple of hundred members, and over the last 15 months, it's undergone new leadership with more of a campaigning agenda. So what you may have seen already is that ISBA leaning in more into the conversations in the market and trying to drive positive change in the market to make sure it's a fairer, more transparent marketplace.
Marvelous. And how long have you been there? And what is it that you do? What's your objective for the year?
So I've been there since September, October last year, as Director of Media, so covering all media channels. And primarily I came into ISBA to try and boost our digital capabilities, more understanding of the market. Although, of course, there are many channels for marketers to choose from, digital is the most complex, and ultimately it's the one that's least well understood, just because of its complexities and the fact that it's an ever-moving and shifting beast. So I came into the organisation to help sort of beef that up and campaign more on the digital front, but my remit covers television, outdoor, cinema, covers all channels.
Okay. You must have a huge team then helping you do all of that.
Modest. So we have a lot of ground to cover, but as I said, digital has become, essentially the majority of what we've had focus on day to day in terms of trying to change and make some changes in the market, just because of the developing nature of the market. Okay,
great, thank you. And so I was mentioning before that in order to maintain a fair and transparent and equitable marketplace, the buyer does have a huge impact on that in terms of the transparency, the margins, the working media, the supply chain. Because of course you could argue that they are at the top of the supply chain. Do you find that marketers in particular, we can talk about agencies as well, but marketers understand that? Do they feel a level of responsibility to build a more sustainable marketplace?
So I think that the marketers absolutely want media plurality. They want choice and freedom of choice, and they believe that that competition is healthy. I think that it's challenging if you would say that it's the marketer's responsibility to make sure that media channels actually have the appropriate investment, that every publisher has appropriate investment to sort of build better services. Of course, that's part of it, because of course marketers want to reach the valuable audiences, which of course they deliver. But it's got to be a two-way street. It's got to deliver value. So yes, the investment, of course, will help to sort of fund, on hopes, better, fairer, more marketplace. And there's a definitive interest in making sure that it works fairly, to make sure there's more transparency in the market. Because of course, if there's not, and we have seen practices in the past which have been more opaque, which has really squeezed media margins, and we are passionate about trying to change that to make sure that it is fairer. So yes, marketers do take that, do take that seriously, and think that, again, there's a level of importance. But in isolation in itself, is it marketers' responsibility to make sure they invest in those channels? No, it has to be a two-way street. There has to be a return on investment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It is hard to obviously drive that level of understanding with a marketer unless they understand, of course, what's in it for them. They certainly, it's easy as a publisher to think that, well, they need to be able to support me, or they have a responsibility for media plurality. So when you say something that's sort of equitable, or a quid pro quo almost, is there an example of that, or is there a way that people could engage with marketers to help them see what's in it for them, publishers in particular?
Yes, I mean, I think that we certainly what we're doing at ISBA is making sure we're connecting more to the marketplace and making sure we're understanding all of the kind of key stakeholders in the supply chain. We do, of course, have, which we'll come on to later, a framework which we've published a couple of years ago. We've just updated it, which looks at advisory terms and conditions, essentially for contractual terms and conditions between agencies and buyers. They are advisory. There's a framework. So we'll come on to that and discuss that later. So that's a way, but it doesn't just talk about how the client should work with the agency. It determines essentially how they should work, how the whole supply chain should work, and how the agency is on their behalf should ensure that delivering transparency and accountability throughout the supply chain.
Well, why don't we talk about this now? Some of you may have read in the press recently about the work that ISBA has just undertaken, specifically about the contract between agencies and marketers. There's always been a bit of a spotlight on this, and certainly I was at your conference earlier in the year, and Mark Pritchard from P&G was talking about the majority of the time they've spent over the last 12 months has been scrutinizing the contract between themselves and their respective agencies globally. So could you just talk a bit more about the work that ISBA has done, and where you see that going? It also came in for a little bit of criticism from some other bodies like Ubiquity and some of our US colleagues as well. If you could touch on what those challenges have been as well, that'd be great. Yeah,
of course. So in 2016, we published the first version of that framework. It was a couple of years in the making. So it is advisory terms and conditions to advise clients when they're negotiating the business with agencies. Some clients take it wholesale. They're in the kind of minority. Most use it to inform their current contracts in place, or again when they're pitching the business. It's just gone through an update which we published in the last month. That has been several months of work. Working with a number of parties, including Pricewaterhouse, who are a strategic partner, who've been helping to actually then work with agencies. They work with many agencies across pitch processes, and actually trying to get feedback from agencies to actually look at where all the terms and conditions are preserved in their need to actually try and drive, again, transparency and accountability. So the essence still remains the same, but there are areas where agencies said, well, actually, we think there needs to be sort of terms which essentially are broader and fairer. It's essentially, kind of see both sides, and we've then sort of tweaked that accordingly. What that's led to, we had Ubiquity and one or two other commentators in the industry saying actually they were challenging a couple of the terms and saying, well, actually, we need to make sure that it is, when there are rebates and when there's value pots being delivered back to the client, that's absolutely clear, what money is being, how clients' money is being used, and what rebates and what value is being returned as a result of that investment. And that needs to be transparent. We absolutely agree. So as part of that, we've just tweaked a couple of the kind of terms to make sure they absolutely reflect that intention, which it always did. And I think that way we're fully agreed. But it does recognise that there is a difference also. Ubiquity are advising our sister trade association in the US, the ANA, and it does reflect a slight change and difference between the two markets. I think in the UK, we collaborate more, I think, between between agencies and clients more, I would say, in the UK than we do in the US, where I don't say they're far apart, but I think they don't have quite the same level of collaboration, which is not bad thing. It's just saying that that there is a spirit of trying to make sure we kind of push forward together and find more of a kind of middle ground that again preserves that need to be explicitly clear about where money is going, how it's been invested, what money is being returned. So that we absolutely agree on. But the framework itself may be slightly different to that seen in the US.
Okay. Well, it's obviously a fantastic step forward in terms of driving a good level of transparency. And certainly one of the things I hope for, and I imagine quite a lot of people here as well, is that work can also then translate onto other parts of the market. Because, of course, as we know, it's not just agencies now that buy a lot of media, it's ad tech vendors that buy a lot of media. One or two very large ones in particular. They're actually, in some cases, buying more media than some of the large agency groups. And also, I think I have a slide here for this. Everybody will be familiar with this. I do know this is about 8 years old, yes. I'm not putting this up as new information. But I'm putting this up to say that this is one of the documents that marketers have been looking at. This was produced by the WFA. I don't know if you can see the small print down there. The source being industry experts. And I would suggest a lot of marketers have used this as a reference point for where their money goes. And you'll also notice therefore that most of the money they believe is taken before it reaches the publisher. Now, I don't know if anybody would agree or disagree with that. We can discuss it in the break. I personally disagree with that. In the case of agencies, quite often the money makes it to the publisher and then it's incentivized back to the agency or the marketer for more spend. But in the case of ad tech, most of the money comes probably after value adds in that exchange column where it says 5%. So what I'm talking to Steve about here, then, what I was about to ask, in the spirit of marketplaces working correctly and having transparency and effective governance and legislation, Uber was a great example where they were not governed by the same policies that the black taxis were governed by. It wasn't fair. They couldn't operate in the same way. One had a significant advantage over the other. And I would argue that in the case of media buying, DSPs have a significant advantage over agencies because they're allowed to do whatever they like. They can take whatever margin they want to. They're not audited in any way about where the money goes. Do you see an opportunity to do something about that?
Yeah, absolutely do. So it's definitely true to say that marketers find this very concerning. This is one of many charts. There are a variety of different charts in the industry. Notably, Truth, as a new blockchain agency, have demonstrated examples where they felt that 93% was being taken out in the supply chain. The FT themselves, because they're both buyers and the marketers, they bought their own inventory. They were able to find that 70% of money was taken out before they got the money back. So it's not to say that these examples aren't true, because this is one snapshot in time, looking essentially at margins at that point in time when it was published in 2014. But it does vary. There are different studies showing that it's smaller or bigger. But the concerning element then is making sure that the client is aware, and the agency on their behalf, aware of where all the margins are being taken. So to your point, if that moves then going directly and trading directly with DSPs or exchanges, the same rules need to apply. And we would certainly encourage, and we do with our marketer members who are considering it. We see the vast majority still have agency managed models and agency service because they want to tap into that expertise, that knowledge base, and that valuable sort of strategy consultancy that they have through partners they have through their agencies. But some of them are now looking to take control of the contract. They're looking at contracting directly with DSPs, and by doing so, they have access to the data, they have control of the contract, but they have their client, have their agency then managing that on their behalf. But it gives them full access to the data. That's been another challenge as well, is sometimes not having that access to the data. It gives them that ability. It is a challenge because ultimately it means your world opens up in terms of what you need to know and how these function. But they are asking for the same terms, conditions, in a similar way in terms of transparency about saying what are you buying, how are you buying it, what margins are you buying on it, what rebates are there in the market, and what can we expect. All the same, the same way that they would trade. But I've no doubt that there may be some in the market that don't possibly offer that level of transparency, but we're advising our members to essentially apply the same rules as they would do working with their agency.
That's very good to hear. I'm sick of seeing this. I will get rid of it from the screen in just a moment. But very quickly, I see we're pretty much up on time. You are working on a project to try to address this at ISBA.
We are indeed. So While these are important references in time, what this doesn't talk about, of course, is the value that each of those partners offer in the supply chain. And what we want to try and do is try and get a UK view of the market. So we're undertaking a project at the moment, tentatively called the Leaky Bucket, where we'll be commissioning, actually looking at a study which is UK specific, but looking at value, looking at the complexities in the market, and looking at what needs to change to make it a more transparent marketplace. And what we might be able to do, we're hoping to be able to do as a kind of potential extension, is then do a sort of forensic investigation. A similar study was done in the States, where they were to actually use a company to forensically look at log file data, so they could absolutely track every impression, every margin, and actually have an accurate costing model rather than an approximate model based on approximate margins at a given period of time.
Got it. Well, so we're going to have to wrap up. I'm very pleased to hear that. Certainly, people are allowed to do what they want with their money as long as marketers are informed and as long as people understand where it is and they understand what the benefit is they're getting. Really getting rid of that one. Steve, I want to thank you very much. Steve will be around for the morning, so if you want to grab him and talk to him about any of the projects that he's referenced, then please do so. So, Steve, thank you very much.